The lights went out in a neighborhood of Huancayo just after 9 at night. Not the whole city, just a handful of streets in the Chilca district, going dark one after another. It was Saturday, July 18th, 2026. People walked outside in their pajamas, phones lit up, checking on neighbors, comparing what they'd each just felt. Come with me to the Mantaro Valley high in the Peruvian Andes, because what shook this valley that night didn't come from where earthquakes are supposed to come from in Peru, and by the next morning, the toll of what it left behind was becoming clear. Here's the scale of it in plain numbers first, and then in something you can actually picture. Peru's own Geophysical Institute, the IGP, measured this quake at magnitude 5.1 at a depth of 24 kilometers, with an epicenter about 7 kilometers south of the town of Chupaca. The United States Geological Survey, working from thousands of miles away with a different set of instruments, measured it at magnitude 5.5 at a shallower 10 kilometers near the town of Sicaya. Hold on to that gap for a moment. It isn't a mistake. It's a clue, and we'll come back to it. For now, picture the depth, 10 to 24 kilometers down. That's roughly the drive from downtown Huancayo out past the edge of the valley, except straight down through solid rock. That's shallow, as earthquakes go, and shallow matters more than the magnitude number alone, because energy that starts close to the surface doesn't have far to travel before it reaches you. That's part of why, even though 5.1 to 5.5 sounds moderate on paper, this earthquake turned deadly. As of the most recent reporting, at least 3 to 5 people have been confirmed killed, with the toll still being finalized as authorities work through the affected communities and roughly 10 to 11 others injured. The worst hit district was Chongos Bajo, where a fatality was reported and homes were damaged badly enough that residents needed medical attention. In Pucará, about 30 minutes from Huancayo, people were reported trapped after the shaking hit. In Vista Alegre and Huancayo Chico, homes were damaged and residents were injured. In Huancayo itself, 2 hospitals sustained damage. The Daniel Alcides Carrion Hospital, which was still treating the injured, and the El Carmen Mother and Child Hospital, where cracks opened up in the pediatric intensive care unit. A magnitude 3.7 aftershock followed about 17 minutes later, felt but far weaker than the main shock. A colonial-era religious monument in Chongos Bajo's main square, the Cani Cruz, collapsed during the quake. Rescue teams, firefighters, police, and municipal emergency services were still working through the region as this was written, and Peru's National Emergency Operations Center deployed ambulance crews to support the response. Now walk a little further back with me, because to understand why the ground moved this violently in a farming valley more than 3,000 meters up in the mountains, you first need to see where Peru's earthquakes are supposed to come from. Off Peru's coast, the Nazca Plate is diving underneath the South American plate, grinding downward at a steady pace, locking and slipping in cycles that last centuries. That collision built the entire Andes mountain range, and it also produced the earthquakes most people associate with Peru, the ones that made world news, like the 1970 Yungay earthquake and the 2007 Pisco earthquake. Both of those happened where the 2 plates meet, close to the coastline, at depths of tens of kilometers along that great sloping interface. Geologists call this an interplate or subduction earthquake, the plates themselves sliding against each other. But Chupaca and Sicaya are nowhere near that interface. They sit roughly 300 kilometers inland high in the Mantaro Valley, in the very heart of the mountains the subduction zone built. So if this earthquake didn't come from the plates sliding past each other, where did it come from? Picture slowly squeezing a stack of towels between your 2 hands. Most of the give happens right where your palms press together, but the towels also bunch, wrinkle, and occasionally tear somewhere in the middle, far from your hands. The Andes work the same way. The collision at the coast doesn't only create friction at the plate boundary, it compresses the mountains it built all the way through for hundreds of kilometers inland. That squeezed, wrinkled rock stores stress of its own, in cracks called faults that exist entirely within a single plate. And when one of those cracks finally slips, geologists call it a crustal earthquake, or an intraplate earthquake, inside the plate, not between 2 plates. This valley has one of those cracks, and it has a name and a history, the Huaytapallana Fault, which geologists have studied for decades. In 1969, 2 earthquakes tore along sections of that same fault, magnitudes 5.6 and 6.2, leaving visible surface ruptures several kilometers long that researchers could still trace afterward. The fault didn't fully release its strain that year. Scientists who've mapped it since have identified a gap along its length that never broke. Whether this new earthquake unloaded any part of that old gap isn't something that can be stated with certainty from the data published so far. That question belongs to the seismologists studying the aftershocks right now, not to speculation. Which brings us back to that gap between the 2 agencies' measurements, 5. One at 24 kilometers from Peru's own institute, versus 5.5 at 10 kilometers from the USGS. Neither one is wrong. In the first hours after any earthquake, different networks work from different sets of seismic stations, different calibration models, and different amounts of data. Peru's Geophysical Institute uses its own national network, tuned specifically to the country's geology. The USGS blends global stations with automated algorithms designed to give a fast first estimate anywhere on Earth. Both get reviewed and refined over the following hours and days. That small disagreement isn't sloppy science. It's what real-time seismology actually looks like before the dust has settled. So here's how it comes together. At around 9:24 p.m., local time on Saturday, July 18th, a section of crust in the valley, inside the South American plate rather than at its edge, released stress that had been building for decades along a fault already known for producing damaging quakes. Peru's IGP measured it at magnitude 5.1, 24 kilometers deep. The USGS measured it at magnitude 5.5, 10 kilometers deep. A shallow crustal intraplate rupture, not a subduction earthquake, with shaking that reached an estimated intensity of IV to V on the modified Mercalli scale in Chupaca itself, where it was felt by most residents and prompted many to evacuate their homes. That combination of shallow depth and inland crustal setting is exactly why a moderate-sounding magnitude did real damage on the ground. And underneath that data, there were people. In the Chilca district of Huancayo, the power cut out block by block, and residents came out into the cold mountain night to stand together in the street the way people do when a wall or ceiling suddenly feels less trustworthy than it did an hour before. Local reporting described it as among the strongest shaking many in the valley had felt in years. According to Peruvian authorities, earthquakes of magnitude 5 or higher strike the Chupaca area roughly once every 13 years, while smaller tremors are far more common across the broader Junín region. Officials have been clear that earthquakes can't be predicted, but say seismic hazard models help identify which areas carry the highest risk. And this valley, sitting on a known fault with a documented history of rupture, was already on that list. As of this morning, July 19th, rescue and recovery work is ongoing across the affected districts. Hospitals in Huancayo are treating the injured while also repairing damage to their own facilities, and Peru's civil defense and disaster risk authorities are continuing to assess the full scope of what this earthquake did to the valley. A magnitude 5 to 5.5 crustal earthquake doesn't tell scientists a larger one is imminent, but for the families in Chongos Bajo, Pucará, and the surrounding communities, the science of why the ground moved matters less this morning than the work of finding out who's still under the rubble and helping the people who made it out.